Love has a way of making millionaires feel like kings until the kingdom starts burning down around them. Danny Reyes pressed his palm against the cold glass of his penthouse window, watching his reflection merge with the city lights 20 floors below. The irony cut deep. He owned one of the most expensive views in the city, yet he couldn't see a way out of the financial hell that was swallowing him whole. His tech empire, built over a decade of ruthless ambition and sleepless nights, was crumbling faster than he could patch the widening cracks. "Danny, baby, you're going to wear a hole in that floor if you keep pacing like that." Terry's voice floated from the kitchen, warm and melodious as always, carrying that hint of playful concern that had captured his heart 5 years ago. Even now, with bankruptcy breathing down his neck like a hungry wolf, her voice could still make his pulse quicken. She appeared in the doorway, her dark skin glowing in the soft ambient lighting, wearing the emerald silk dress he'd bought her in Milan during their 3rd anniversary trip. "Come eat with me," she said, crossing the marble floor with that graceful walk that had stopped traffic the first day he'd seen her. "I made your favorite, garlic butter salmon with that wine we've been saving." Danny turned from the window, forcing a smile that felt like lifting weights. How could he tell her that they might not have a roof over their heads in 6 weeks? That the 2018 Chateau Margaux she'd opened, worth $3,000, was probably the last expensive thing they'd ever taste together. "You look beautiful," he said instead, meaning every word. Even in his darkest moments, Terry remained his light. Her smile could chase away shadows he didn't even know existed. She moved into his arms, her familiar scent of vanilla and jasmine wrapping around him like a warm blanket. "You've been so distant lately. What's really going on in that brilliant mind of yours?" Her fingers traced the worry lines that had deepened around his eyes over the past 3 months. Lines that told the story of a man watching everything he'd built slip through his fingers like water. The failed merger with TechCorp, the investors pulling out after the data breach scandal, the lawsuits piling up like autumn leaves. "Just work stuff," he lied, pulling her closer. "Nothing we can't handle." But that was the cruelest lie of all. There was no we in this nightmare. He'd made sure of that by keeping every devastating detail from her. Terry knew nothing about the second mortgage he'd taken on their home. Nothing about the maxed-out credit lines or the personal guarantees that put everything they owned at risk. She lived in the beautiful bubble he'd created, believing their biggest worry was choosing new curtains for the guest bedroom. "Danny Reyes, I've been married to you for 5 years, she said, stepping back to look directly into his eyes. "I know when you're lying to me. Talk to me. We're a team, remember?" A team. The word hit him like a physical blow. They had been a team once, back when success seemed inevitable and the future stretched out before them like an endless highway. Back when their biggest concern was picking out baby names for the children they'd been trying to have for 3 years. "I promise, it's nothing I can't handle," he said, hating himself for the deception. "You know how these tech deals work. One day you're on top of the world, the next you're scrambling to stay afloat." She studied his face for a long moment, and he could see the doubt creeping into her beautiful brown eyes. Terry wasn't naive. She was a successful marketing executive in her own right before she'd taken time off to focus on starting their family. She understood business pressure. "Okay," she said finally, though he could hear the reluctance in her voice. "But when you're ready to talk about whatever's really bothering you, I'm here. We'll figure it out together. Just like we always do. Together." Another word that felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Because the truth was, there might not be a together if he couldn't find a miracle in the next 6 weeks. They sat down to dinner at their dining table, a custom piece that had cost more than most people's cars. The salmon was perfect, as everything Terry cooked always was. She'd learned from YouTube videos and cooking shows, determined to master every cuisine for him. Even the plating looked like something from a five-star restaurant. "Remember our first dinner together?" she asked, cutting into her salmon with delicate precision. "You took me to that fancy place downtown, and I was so nervous I knocked over my water glass 3 times. Danny smiled, this time genuinely. "You were wearing that blue dress with the tiny flowers. You looked so beautiful I forgot how to speak properly. I think I ordered the soup 3 times before the waiter understood what I wanted. And you were so sweet about the water," she laughed, the sound filling their expensive dining room with warmth. "You pretended it was completely normal, even flagged down the waiter for more napkins like it was no big deal." "I was already gone by then," Danny admitted, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Completely head over heels, can't think straight gone." Her fingers intertwined with his, and he felt that familiar electric connection that had never faded, not even during their worst arguments or most stressful moments. Their love had been the one constant in his life, the foundation everything else was built on. "I still get butterflies when you look at me like that," she whispered. The moment was perfect, just like hundreds of others they'd shared over 5 years of marriage. But underneath Danny's smile, panic clawed at his chest like a caged animal. How could he destroy this? How could he tell the woman who loved him unconditionally that he'd gambled away their entire future on a business deal that had exploded in his face? "Any word from Dr. Martinez about the fertility tests?" he asked, desperate to change the subject to something, anything, other than their impending financial ruin. Terry's face lit up with hope and anticipation. "She said the results should be in by Friday. I have a good feeling about this round, Danny. I really do." The enthusiasm in her voice broke his heart. For 3 years, they'd been trying to have a baby. 3 years of specialists, treatments, hope, and disappointment. Terry approached each possibility with renewed optimism, while Danny wrestled with the growing fear that maybe they weren't meant to be parents. "Whatever happens, we'll be okay," he said, squeezing her hand. "We have each other. That's enough." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. Nothing felt like enough anymore. Not their love, not their beautiful home, not the life they'd built together. Because all of it was about to disappear, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do to stop it. After dinner they curled up together on their Italian leather sofa, Terry's head on his shoulder as they watched an old romantic comedy she'd seen 100 times, her soft breathing against his neck, the way her hand rested over his heart. These were the moments he'd tried to freeze in his memory, knowing they might be numbered. "I love you, Danny Reyes," she murmured sleepily against his chest. "Whatever's worrying you, we'll get through it. We always do." As he watched her drift off to sleep in his arms, Danny made a silent promise to find a way to save their life together, no matter what it took, no matter what he had to sacrifice. He had no idea that in just a few weeks, his mother would present him with a solution so monstrous that it would destroy everything he'd ever loved. But that night, holding his wife in their beautiful home, Danny Reyes still believed in happy endings. Chapter 2. The Web of Deception. The devil doesn't always come wearing horns. Sometimes she comes wearing Chanel and calling herself Mother. Kim Creech sat in her son's study, fingers drumming against the mahogany desk as she rifled through the stack of papers Danny thought he'd hidden so well. Insurance policies, loan documents, foreclosure notices. The financial carnage was even worse than she'd suspected. But among all the destruction, one document made her pause, a slow smile spreading across her carefully maintained face. Life insurance policy, Terry Gizi Reyes. Beneficiary, Daniel Reyes, $2 million. "Interesting," she murmured, holding the paper up to the lamplight as if examining a precious gemstone. "Very interesting indeed. Kim had always been a practical woman. At 62, she'd survived a bitter divorce from Danny's father, built her own successful real estate empire, and learned that sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. Love was fine for greeting cards and romantic comedies, but money was what kept the lights on and the wolves at bay. She'd watched her son spiral into this financial mess with a mixture of frustration and disgust. Danny had always been too soft, too trusting, too willing to believe that hard work and good intentions would somehow magically solve everything. He'd inherited his father's weak heart and naive optimism, traits that had landed him in this predicament. But Kim Creech hadn't raised a quitter, and she certainly hadn't sacrificed 20 years of her life helping him build his company just to watch it all disappear because of some bad business deals. The front door chimed, and Kim quickly slipped the insurance policy back into the stack, arranging the papers exactly as she'd found them. She heard Terry's voice calling out a greeting, followed by the sound of heels clicking across the marble foyer. "Mrs. Creech? I didn't know you were coming by today." Terry appeared in the doorway of the study, looking effortlessly beautiful in a simple white blouse and dark jeans. Even dressed casually, she had that natural elegance that had initially impressed Kim, back when she thought Terry was just a temporary distraction for her son. 5 years later, Kim's opinion had soured considerably. "I was in the neighborhood," Kim replied smoothly, rising from the chair with practiced grace. "You know how I worry about Danny. He's been working such long hours lately." "Tell me about it," Terry sighed, setting down her purse and keys. "I can barely get him to eat dinner these days. He's so stressed about work." Kim watched Terry's face carefully, noting the genuine concern etched in her features. The girl really had no idea how dire their situation was. Danny had protected her from the truth with the dedication of a knight guarding a princess. Noble, perhaps, but ultimately useless. "Have you two given any more thought to what we discussed?" Kim asked, settling back into the chair as if she belonged there. "About maybe taking some time apart. A separation might give Danny the space he needs to focus on saving his business." Terry's expression immediately hardened. This wasn't the first time Kim had suggested that Terry was somehow holding Danny back, that their marriage was a distraction from his professional obligations. "With all due respect, Mrs. Creech, my marriage is between Danny and me. We're stronger together, not apart." "Of course, dear," Kim replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm just thinking about what's best for everyone involved." What was best for everyone involved was getting Terry out of the picture permanently. Kim had never approved of her son's choice in wives, too independent, too opinionated, too quick to challenge Kim's influence over Danny. Worse, she was black, which in Kim's carefully hidden but deeply held prejudices made her unsuitable for the Creech family legacy. Not that Kim would ever say such things aloud. She was far too sophisticated for crude racism. Instead, she'd spent 5 years planting subtler seeds of doubt, questioning Terry's commitment, her background, her ability to understand the pressures of running a multi-million-dollar business. "I should let you get back to your day," Kim said, gathering her purse. "Oh, and Terry, you might want to have a conversation with your husband about that plumber who's been doing work here. I saw him leaving yesterday afternoon and he seemed overly familiar with the house layout." It was a carefully chosen seed, planted with surgical precision. Kim had noticed the young man, handsome, probably around Terry's age, with an easy smile and confident manner. The perfect candidate for what she had in mind. "Miguel? He's been working on the bathroom renovation for weeks. Danny hired him." "I'm sure it's nothing," Kim said with a dismissive wave. "But you know how men can be around beautiful women. Just something to keep an eye on." Terry's confusion was evident, but Kim could see the seed taking root. A tiny furrow appeared between Terry's eyebrows, the first sign of doubt beginning to bloom. After leaving Danny's house, Kim drove directly to the construction company's office. She'd done her research over the past week, learning everything she could about Miguel Santos, 28 years old, recently divorced, struggling to make his mortgage payments on a modest house in the suburbs. "Mrs. Creech," Miguel looked surprised when she walked into the small office. "Is there a problem with the work at your son's house?" "On the contrary," Kim said, settling into the chair across from his cluttered desk. "I'm very impressed with your professionalism. In fact, I have a proposition that might benefit both of us." She opened her purse and placed a thick envelope on his desk. Miguel's eyes widened when he saw the cash inside, more money than he probably made in 3 months. "I need you to install some additional security cameras in my son's house," she said. "Very discreet ones that my daughter-in-law won't notice." "Mrs. Creech, I don't think—" "5,000 now, 5,000 when the job is complete," she interrupted. "And Miguel, I need you to be very creative about where you place them. The master bedroom, for instance. My son suspects his wife might be having an affair, and he needs proof for the divorce proceedings." It was a lie, of course, but Miguel didn't know that. All he saw was enough money to catch up on his mortgage and maybe take his kids on that vacation he'd promised them. "I don't know, Mrs. Creech, that seems kind of—" "Think about it this way," Kim said, leaning forward with practiced sincerity. "If she's cheating, my son deserves to know. If she's not, then no harm done. Either way, you're helping a family find the truth." Miguel stared at the money for a long moment. Kim could see the internal battle playing out across his face, his conscience warring with his desperation. "What exactly would you need me to do?" Kim's smile was predatory. "I need you to seduce my daughter-in-law, get her alone, get her comfortable, and make sure it's all captured on camera. Can you do that for me, Miguel?" The young man's face went pale. "You want me to—" "Mrs. Creech, that's not right. I can't do that to someone." "You're not doing anything to her," Kim said smoothly. "You're simply giving her the opportunity to show her true nature. If she's faithful to my son, she'll reject your advances. If she's not—" She shrugged eloquently. "And if she does reject me?" Kim's expression turned cold as winter steel. "Then we'll have to be more creative about the staging, won't we?" The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Miguel understood exactly what she was suggesting. Fake the evidence if the real thing couldn't be obtained. "I need time to think about this," he said finally. "You have until tomorrow," Kim replied, standing and smoothing down her skirt. "But Miguel, don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't come around often." As she walked back to her car, Kim felt the familiar thrill of a plan coming together. She'd spent her entire life manipulating situations to her advantage, and this would be no different. Danny was too weak to save himself, too blinded by misplaced love to see the obvious solution staring him in the face. But Kim wasn't weak. And when this was all over, when the insurance money had solved their financial problems and removed the obstacle of Terry from their lives, Danny would thank her. Eventually, he'd understand that everything she'd done was for his own good. That night, Kim lay in her bed planning the next phase of her strategy. She needed Danny to be absolutely convinced of Terry's betrayal. She needed him broken, desperate, and angry enough to consider the unthinkable. Because Kim Creech had learned long ago that desperate people were capable of anything, even murdering the person they loved most in the world. All she had to do was push Danny to that breaking point. And after 40 years of manipulating her son, she knew exactly which buttons to press. Chapter 3. The Poisoned Heart. Hell hath no fury like a man who believes his heart has been shattered by the woman he would have died for. Danny stared at the laptop screen, his hands trembling so violently he could barely control the mouse. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m., yesterday afternoon, when he'd been in meetings downtown, fighting desperately to save what remained of his crumbling business empire. The video was crystal clear, shot from what appeared to be a hidden camera in their master bedroom. His wife, his beautiful, loving wife, in their bed, with another man. The sound came through with devastating clarity. Terry's soft moans, her whispered words of passion, the creak of their expensive mattress as she moved with Miguel, the plumber who'd been working on their bathroom renovation for the past month. "Turn it off," Danny whispered, but his mother's hand stayed firmly on his shoulder, forcing him to watch every excruciating second. "You need to see this, Daniel," Kim said, her voice soft with manufactured sympathy. "You need to see who she really is." His vision blurred as tears he couldn't control spilled down his cheeks. 5 years of marriage. 5 years of believing he'd found his soulmate, his other half, the woman who would stand by him through anything. And this entire time she'd been lying to him, betraying him, making a fool of him in their own home. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "How long has this been going on?" Kim clicked to another file. 3 weeks, from what I can tell. Miguel installed the cameras because he suspected something was happening between them. He wanted to protect you, but he needed proof before he could say anything. Another video began playing. This one was from their living room, showing Terry and Miguel in what appeared to be an intimate conversation on their sofa. Danny watched his wife laugh at something the younger man said, watched her touch his arm in a way that seemed far too familiar, far too comfortable. "She's been planning this for months," Kim continued, her voice dripping with false concern. "Think about it, Daniel. She insisted on hiring this particular contractor. She's been working from home more often lately. All those afternoons when you thought she was running errands or meeting friends." Danny's stomach lurched. He rushed to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left, his body rejecting the poison of this revelation as violently as his heart rejected the truth of what he'd seen. When he emerged, pale and shaking, Kim was waiting with a glass of water and another folder of papers. "There's more," she said gently. "Miguel found these in her car yesterday. Hotel receipts, credit card statements showing charges at expensive restaurants Danny had never been to, text messages on a phone bill that weren't between Terry and him. She's been living a double life," Kim continued, her manipulation so skillful it felt like compassion. "While you've been killing yourself trying to save your business, trying to provide for your future together, she's been playing house with another man." Danny sank into his chair, the weight of betrayal crushing him like a physical force. Everything felt surreal, like he was watching someone else's nightmare unfold. This couldn't be his life. This couldn't be his wife. "The fertility problems," he whispered suddenly, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. 3 years of trying, all those doctor visits, the treatments that never worked. "Maybe the problem was never medical," Kim suggested with surgical precision. "Maybe she just didn't want to have your children." The words hit Danny like bullets, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. He thought about all the nights Terry had cried about their inability to conceive, all the false hope and crushing disappointment. Had it all been an act? Had she been secretly relieved every time the pregnancy test came back negative? "I need to confront her," Danny said, reaching for his phone. "I need to hear her explain this." "No!" Kim's hand closed over his, stopping him mid-dial. "Think about what you're doing, Daniel. If you confront her now, what happens? She'll deny it, make up some story about how the videos are fake or taken out of context. She'll make you feel like you're the crazy one for not trusting her." Danny stared at his mother, seeing the wisdom in her words, even through his haze of pain and rage. "What she's done to you is unforgivable," Kim continued. "But more than that, it's dangerous. If she's willing to carry on an affair in your own home, what else is she capable of? Have you checked your bank accounts lately? Your credit cards? Your business files? The paranoia took root immediately, growing like a cancer in Danny's wounded psyche. He grabbed his laptop and began frantically checking their joint accounts, looking for signs of financial betrayal to match the emotional devastation. "She withdrew $5,000 last week," he said, staring at the screen in disbelief. "Cash withdrawal. I never saw any cash." "Probably paying for those hotel rooms," Kim said sadly. "Or maybe she's planning to leave you, Daniel. Maybe she's been building a nest egg for her new life with Miguel." Danny's world tilted on its axis. The woman he'd loved more than his own life, the woman he'd been willing to sacrifice everything to protect from their financial troubles, had been systematically destroying him from the inside out. "I can't breathe," he gasped, loosening his tie as panic consumed him. "I can't. How could she do this to me?" Kim moved behind his chair, her hands massaging his shoulders in a gesture that might have seemed motherly to an outside observer. But her touch felt cold, calculated, designed to comfort just enough to keep him vulnerable to her influence. "You trusted her completely," Kim said softly. "You opened your heart, your home, your life to her. And she threw it all away for some cheap affair with a man who probably sees her as nothing more than an easy conquest." "She told me she loved me," Danny whispered, his voice breaking. "Just last night, she told me she loved me." "People like Terry are very good at saying what others want to hear," Kim replied. "It's how they manipulate and control. She's been playing a role, Daniel, the loving wife, the devoted partner, the woman who wants nothing more than to build a family with you. All of it was a lie." Danny stared at the frozen image on his laptop screen. Terry's face caught in a moment of what appeared to be genuine passion, her eyes closed, her mouth open in pleasure that had nothing to do with him. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked, his voice hollow with defeat. "How do I go home and pretend I don't know? How do I look at her and not see this?" Kim was quiet for a long moment, letting the question hang in the air like a loaded gun. "You know," she said finally, "there might be a way to make this right, a way to make her pay for what she's done to you." Danny looked up at his mother, seeing something in her eyes that should have terrified him. But in his current state of emotional devastation, it looked like hope. "What do you mean?" Kim sat down across from him, her expression serious and calculating. "You're about to lose everything because of bad business deals, correct? The house, the cars, your entire life savings?" Danny nodded miserably. "But there's one asset you haven't considered," Kim continued. "One policy that could solve all your financial problems and give you the fresh start you deserve." She pulled out the life insurance documents, spreading them across the table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. $2 million, Daniel. Tax-free. Enough to pay off all your debts and start over somewhere new, somewhere without all these painful memories. Danny stared at the papers, his mind too shattered to fully process what his mother was suggesting. "You're talking about—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm talking about justice," Kim said firmly. "She's destroyed your life, your business, your ability to trust. She's made a mockery of your marriage and stolen years of your life with her lies. Why should she get to walk away from this unscathed while you lose everything?" "But I love her," Danny said weakly, the words feeling foreign in his mouth after what he'd witnessed. "No," Kim corrected. "You love the woman you thought she was. That woman never existed. The real Terry is a cheating, manipulative liar who's been systematically destroying you while pretending to be your loving wife." Danny felt something cold and hard crystallizing in his chest where his heart used to be. The love he'd felt for Terry was transforming into something darker, more poisonous. Betrayal and rage mixed with the crushing weight of financial ruin, creating a toxic cocktail that clouded his judgment and infected his soul. "Think about it," Kim continued, pressing her advantage. "You could make this look like an accident, a fall, perhaps, or a break-in gone wrong. No one would ever suspect you. You're the grieving husband after all. And afterward, you'd have the resources to rebuild your life, to find someone who truly deserves your love. As Danny sat in his mother's living room, staring at evidence of his wife's betrayal, the man he'd been for 35 years began to die. In his place, something harder and more desperate was being born, something capable of unthinkable acts in the name of survival and revenge. He didn't know that every piece of evidence was fabricated. He didn't know that Miguel had been coerced into participating in an elaborate con game. He didn't know that the woman he was planning to destroy was innocent of everything except loving him unconditionally. All Danny knew was that his heart had been shattered beyond repair, and someone was going to pay for it. Chapter 4. The Point of No Return. There comes a moment in every man's life when he must choose between the person he was and the monster he's willing to become. Danny sat in his car outside their house, his and Terry's house, for 20 minutes, unable to force himself to walk through the front door. 3 days had passed since his mother had shown him the videos. 3 days of living in a waking nightmare where every memory felt like a lie and every moment of happiness seemed like cruel mockery. He'd barely slept, barely eaten, barely functioned. At the office, his remaining employees whispered about his haggard appearance and erratic behavior. They thought the stress of the failing business was finally breaking him. If only they knew the truth was so much worse. Through the living room window, he could see Terry moving around their kitchen, probably preparing dinner like the devoted wife she'd always appeared to be. The sight of her filled him with a nauseating mixture of rage and longing that made his chest feel like it was being torn in half. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Have you decided? Time is running out." She was right. The foreclosure notice had arrived that morning, 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days before everything he'd built came crashing down around him. Unless he acted on the plan she'd outlined with such chilling precision, the plan that would solve all his problems with one terrible act. Danny closed his eyes and tried to remember the man he'd been a week ago, a man who would have been horrified by the thoughts now consuming his mind. But that man had believed in love, in trust, in the fundamental goodness of the woman sleeping beside him every night. That man had been a fool. Taking a deep breath, Danny finally walked into the house he might not own much longer. "There you are," Terry said, looking up from the stove with a smile that once would have melted his heart. Now it felt like acid on an open wound. "I was starting to worry. You've been working such late hours lately." "Just trying to save the business," he replied, his voice sounding strange and hollow to his own ears. She studied his face with that intuitive concern that had always made him feel so loved and understood. Now he wondered if it was just another performance, another layer of the elaborate deception she'd been maintaining. "Danny, you look terrible. When's the last time you ate a real meal or got more than 4 hours of sleep?" Her genuine worry might have been touching if he hadn't seen the videos of her with Miguel, if he hadn't watched her betray their marriage vows in the very bedroom where she held him every night, whispering that everything would be okay. "I'm fine," he said, accepting the plate she handed him. Chicken parmesan, another one of his favorites that she'd learned to make perfectly, just for him. Even her cooking felt like a lie now. They ate in relative silence, the easy conversation that had always flowed between them replaced by Danny's internal monologue of rage and planning. He found himself studying her face, looking for signs of deception he'd somehow missed. Was she thinking about Miguel right now? Comparing Danny to her lover and finding him lacking? "I've been thinking," Terry said suddenly, cutting through his dark thoughts. "Maybe we should take a vacation, just the two of us. Somewhere tropical and relaxing. You've been under so much stress lately and we haven't had any real time together in months." A vacation. with the woman who'd been systematically destroying his life while pretending to love him. The irony was so bitter he almost laughed. "That sounds expensive," he said instead. "Maybe when things settle down with work." "Money isn't everything, Danny," she replied, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I'd rather be broke and happy with you than rich and miserable without you." The words struck him like physical blows. If she truly meant that, why was she sleeping with Miguel in their bed? Why was she withdrawing cash from their accounts and lying about her whereabouts? "Easy to say when you're not the one carrying the weight of everyone's expectations," he snapped, pulling his hand away from hers. Terry looked genuinely hurt by his harsh tone. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to minimize what you're going through. I miss you, Danny. I miss us." She missed them. While she was building a new life with another man, she missed the husband she was planning to discard. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. After dinner, Danny retreated to his study and called his mother. "I can't do it," he said without preamble. "I can't go through with your plan." "Daniel," Kim's voice was patient but firm, "we've discussed this. You don't have any other options." "There has to be another way. Maybe I can negotiate with the creditors, maybe—" "With what? You're $3 million in debt. Your business is worthless. Your house is in foreclosure. And your wife is fucking another man in your bed while you kill yourself trying to provide for her." The brutal summary of his life hit Danny like a sledgehammer. Every word was true, every detail a reminder of how completely he'd failed at everything that mattered. "But murder, Mom. We're talking about murder." "We're talking about justice," Kim corrected, "and survival." "She's already destroyed your life, Daniel. Are you going to let her walk away with half of what's left while you lose everything?" Danny stared out the window of his study, watching Terry tend to her garden in the fading evening light. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. It was impossible to reconcile this image with the woman in those videos. "What if we're wrong?" he asked desperately. "What if there's an explanation for those videos?" "What explanation could there possibly be? You saw them with your own eyes, Daniel. You saw her betraying you in your own home, with your own employee. There's no innocent explanation for what you witnessed." Kim was right, of course. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. And even if he could somehow forgive the affair, how could he forgive the timing? How could he forgive her for destroying their marriage just when he needed her support the most? "The insurance money would solve everything," Kim continued. "You could pay off your debts, start fresh somewhere new. You could find someone who actually deserves your love and loyalty." "How would we even do it?" Danny heard himself asking, and was horrified by how natural the question sounded. "It has to look like an accident," Kim said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Something sudden and tragic. A fall, perhaps, from your terrace. You'd be devastated, of course. The grieving husband who lost the love of his life in a terrible accident." Danny's hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the phone. I can't push her off a building, Mom. I'm not a killer." "You're not killing her," Kim said with chilling logic. "You're ending your suffering. You're taking back control of your life from a woman who's been systematically destroying it. Think of it as self-defense." "That's not how self-defense works, isn't it? She's killed the man you used to be, hasn't she? She's murdered your ability to trust, to love, to believe in anything good. What's left of you when this is all over? What's left when you're homeless and broken while she starts her new life with Miguel?" The questions hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into Danny's wounded psyche and finding every crack in his moral foundation. He thought about the videos again, about Terry's face in those moments of passion with another man. He thought about the lies, the deception, the years of his life stolen by someone he'd trusted completely. "You need to decide tonight," Kim pressed. "The foreclosure is moving forward, the creditors are circling, and every day you wait is another day she has to plan her exit strategy. How long before she files for divorce and takes half of whatever's left?" Danny looked out his study window again. Terry had come inside and was now washing dishes in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. She looked so content, so blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around her. For a moment, his resolve wavered. Then he remembered Miguel's hands on her body, remembered her lies about the cash withdrawals, remembered 3 years of failed fertility treatments that might have been deliberate sabotage. "If I do this," he said slowly, each word feeling like a nail in his own coffin. "How do we make sure no one suspects?" Kim's relief was audible. "Leave that to me. I've been thinking about this for days, working out every detail. You'll take her up to the terrace tomorrow night. Make it romantic, like a celebration. Tell her you've found a solution to your business problems." "What kind of solution?" "It doesn't matter. The point is to get her relaxed and trusting. Maybe bring champagne, set up some candles. Make it look like you're trying to reconnect after all the stress you've been under." Danny closed his eyes, trying to picture himself going through with such an elaborate deception. And then you create an opportunity. Ask her to look at something over the edge or to pose for a photo near the railing. One moment of distraction, one push, and it's over. What if someone sees? What if there are witnesses? That's why the timing is crucial. Late evening, when your neighbors are inside watching television. And Daniel, this is important. You can't be anywhere near the house when it happens. "What do you mean?" "You need an alibi. After the accident, you need to leave immediately. Drive to another city, check into a hotel, make sure you're seen by multiple people. Then you come back the next day and discover what happened." The cold calculation in his mother's voice should have horrified him. Instead, it felt like a lifeline in a sea of despair. "What about you?" Danny asked. "Won't people wonder where you were?" "I'll be on a plane to Australia by midnight," Kim said. "I've already booked the flight. A long-planned visit to your Aunt Margaret, completely unrelated to anything happening here. Perfect timing, really." Danny felt the last pieces of his old life falling away like autumn leaves. The man who had loved Terry unconditionally was dying, replaced by someone harder, more desperate, more willing to do whatever it took to survive. "I need to know you're committed to this," Kim continued. "Once we start down this path, there's no going back. No second thoughts, no backing out at the last minute." "I'm committed," Danny heard himself say, the words coming from some dark place he didn't recognize. "But I need time to plan this properly, to make sure we don't make any mistakes." "Good. But remember, every day we wait is another day she has to destroy what's left of your life. Don't let sentiment make you weak, Daniel. She certainly didn't let it stop her from betraying you." After he hung up, Danny sat in his study for hours, staring at the insurance policy documents his mother had given him. $2 million. Enough to start over, to rebuild, to find some kind of peace in the aftermath of this nightmare. Around midnight, Terry appeared in the doorway wearing one of his old college t-shirts, her hair tied up in a messy bun. "Are you coming to bed?" she asked softly. "You've been in here for hours." Danny looked at her, really looked at her, trying to see the deceptive manipulator his mother had revealed her to be, but all he saw was the woman he'd fallen in love with 5 years ago, the woman who'd made him believe in happily ever after. "In a minute," he said, his voice carefully neutral. She walked over and kissed the top of his head, her familiar scent enveloping him like a warm embrace. "I love you, Danny Reyes. Whatever's bothering you, we'll figure it out together. We always do." As she left the room, Danny felt something crack inside his chest. Whether it was his heart finally breaking completely or his conscience dying, he couldn't tell. All he knew was that tomorrow night, one way or another, his life as he knew it would be over. He spent the rest of the night planning the perfect murder, each detail carefully considered and rehearsed. By dawn, Danny Reyes had crossed a line he never thought he'd approach, let alone step over. The man who had once promised to love and protect Terry until death do them part was now planning to make sure death parted them very soon indeed. Chapter 5. The Cold Calculation. Evil doesn't announce itself with thunder and lightning. It whispers sweet justifications until murder sounds like mercy. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, a fitting backdrop for the conversation that would seal Terry's fate. Danny sat across from his mother at a rickety card table. Blueprints of their house spread between them like battle plans. Kim had chosen this location carefully, somewhere they couldn't be overheard, somewhere their conspiracy could take root in shadows. "You've been thinking about this all wrong," Kim said, her manicured finger tracing the outline of their terrace on the architectural drawings. "This isn't about emotion anymore, Daniel. This is about logistics." Danny stared at the papers, his mind struggling to process how his life had devolved into planning his wife's murder with the clinical precision of a military operation. 3 days had passed since he'd agreed to go through with their plan, and he'd spent every waking moment oscillating between cold determination and nauseating doubt. "The timing has to be perfect," Kim continued, pulling out a detailed schedule she'd prepared. "Terry gets home from her yoga class at 7:30 every Thursday. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, takes her dog for a walk at 8 o'clock sharp. She's been doing it for 3 years, regular as clockwork." "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been watching, Daniel. I've been preparing for this moment since the day I realized that woman was going to destroy you." Kim's voice carried a hint of pride, as if she were discussing a particularly clever business deal rather than premeditated murder. Danny felt sick. "This is insane. We can't actually be sitting here planning to kill my wife. Your wife stopped existing the moment she decided to fuck Miguel in your bed," Kim snapped, her composure cracking slightly. "What you're married to now is a lying, cheating whore who's been systematically destroying your life while playing the innocent victim." The crude language hit Danny like a slap. His mother rarely used profanity, preferring to maintain her image of refined sophistication. Hearing her reduce Terry to such base terms somehow made the plan feel more real, more justified. "The beauty of the terrace is the height," Kim continued, returning to her clinical tone. 20 floors up, concrete landing below. It'll be quick, Daniel. She won't suffer." "Jesus Christ, Mom, listen to yourself. Listen to what we're talking about." Kim leaned forward, her eyes boring into his with laser intensity. "I'm talking about survival. I'm talking about justice. And I'm talking about the only solution that saves you from complete and total ruin." She pulled out another set of papers, Danny's financial records, organized with terrifying efficiency. Every debt, every failed investment, every dollar he owed was catalogued and highlighted. "Without this insurance money, you'll be homeless in 3 weeks, she said matter-of-factly. "You'll lose everything you've ever worked for, everything your father and I sacrificed to help you build. Is that what you want? To end up living in some studio apartment working for someone else while Terry starts her new life with her lover?" Danny stared at the numbers until they blurred together. 3.7 million in debt. Assets worth maybe 400,000, and most of that tied up in the house that was about to be foreclosed on. The math was simple and devastating. "There has to be another way," he said weakly. "What way?" "You've exhausted every legal option. Your business partners have abandoned you. Your investors have written you off, and the banks won't even return your calls. This is the only way, Daniel, the only way to save yourself from complete destruction." Kim stood up and began pacing around the small space, her heels clicking against the concrete floor with military precision. "Let's walk through it one more time," she said, her voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. "Thursday evening, you tell Terry you want to have a romantic dinner on the terrace. You've had a breakthrough with the business, something to celebrate. Danny nodded reluctantly, following her logic despite every instinct screaming at him to stop. You set up candles, open that expensive bottle of champagne you've been saving. Make it special. Make it memorable. The last thing you want is for her to be suspicious or afraid. What if she doesn't want to go out there? What if she's tired or wants to stay inside? Then you insist, Kim said firmly. You tell her this is important to you, that you need to share this moment with her in your favorite spot. Women like Terry are sentimental about that kind of romantic gesture. She'll eat it up. Danny thought about all the times he and Terry had stood on that terrace together, planning their future, dreaming about the children they'd have and the life they'd build. The location held so many beautiful memories that using it for something so terrible felt like desecrating a shrine. Once you're out there, Kim continued, you need to create the opportunity. Ask her to look at something over the edge or to pose for a photo near the railing. The key is to get her in the right position without making her suspicious. And then... Danny's voice was barely above a whisper. And then you do what needs to be done. One push, Daniel, one moment of action, and all your problems disappear. Kim pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. Your plane ticket to Chicago. Flight leaves at 10:15, gets you there by midnight Central Time. You'll check into the Palmer House downtown, use your credit card, tip the bellhop generously so he remembers you. Danny opened the envelope with trembling hands. Everything was arranged with meticulous detail. The flight, the hotel reservation, even a restaurant recommendation for a late dinner. You'll spend the next day being visible, Kim explained. Shopping, sightseeing, anything that puts you on security cameras and creates witnesses. Then Friday evening, you fly back home and discover the tragic accident. What about you? My flight to Sydney leaves at 11:30. By the time anyone thinks to question my whereabouts, I'll be halfway across the Pacific Ocean, visiting my dear sister who I haven't seen in 2 years. The plan was flawless in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. Kim had thought of everything, anticipated every possible complication, covered every angle that might lead back to them. There's one more thing, Kim said, her voice dropping to a whisper. After it happens, after she falls, you cannot go down there. You cannot check on her, you cannot call for help, you cannot do anything that might leave physical evidence. You walk away immediately and stick to the plan. What if she's not dead? What if she's just injured? Kim's expression turned cold as winter steel. A fall from that height onto concrete? Trust me, Daniel, she'll be dead. But even if by some miracle she survives, she'll be so badly injured that she won't remember what happened. Brain trauma, broken bones. She'll be lucky to remember her own name, let alone the details of her last evening. The casual way his mother discussed Terry's potential suffering made Danny's stomach turn. This was the woman who had raised him, who had taught him right from wrong, who had always claimed to love him unconditionally. Now she was planning murder with the detached efficiency of a professional killer. I need you to promise me something, Kim said, reaching across the table to grasp his hands. Once this is over, once you've collected the insurance money and started your new life, you never speak of this again. Not to me, not to anyone. It becomes a tragic accident that you learn to live with. Nothing more. Danny stared into his mother's eyes and saw a stranger looking back at him. When had she become this person? When had she decided that murder was an acceptable solution to their problems? Promise me, Daniel. I promise, he heard himself say, the words feeling like a death sentence for his own soul. Kim smiled and squeezed his hands. Good. Now, let's go over the timeline one more time. We can't afford any mistakes. For the next 2 hours, they rehearsed every detail of the plan until it felt as familiar as breathing. Kim had Danny practice his expressions of shock and grief, coached him on what to say to the police, even helped him compose the text messages he'd send to friends and family announcing the terrible news. By the time they left the warehouse, Danny felt like he was living someone else's life. The man who had walked in still harbored hopes of finding another solution, of somehow saving his marriage and his future without resorting to murder. The man who walked out had crossed a line so fundamental that there was no going back. As he drove home to the woman he planned to kill in less than 24 hours, Danny tried to summon the love he'd once felt for Terry. But all he could see were the images from those videos. All he could hear were his mother's words about betrayal and survival. He found Terry in their bedroom, already asleep, her dark hair spread across the pillow like silk. She looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware that her husband was planning to murder her the following night. Danny stood in the doorway for a long time, memorizing her face, trying to reconcile this sleeping angel with the manipulative destroyer his mother had revealed her to be. By morning, he told himself, the confusion would be gone. By morning, he'd remember why this was necessary, why this was justice, why this was the only way to save himself from total ruin. But that night, watching his wife sleep peacefully beside him, Danny Reyes felt like something essential inside him had already died. Chapter 6. The Fall. Some betrayals are so perfect they feel like love right up until the moment they destroy you. The champagne bubbles caught the candlelight like tiny diamonds, creating a romantic sparkle that made Danny's stomach churn with guilt and determination. He'd spent the entire day in a surreal haze, going through the motions of normalcy, while every cell in his body screamed that tonight would change everything forever. "This is beautiful, baby," Terry said, stepping onto the terrace in the flowing blue dress he'd bought her for their anniversary. "What's the special occasion?" Danny forced a smile that felt like lifting weights. "Can't a man celebrate the woman he loves without needing a reason?" She laughed, the sound carrying across the city lights spread out below them like a constellation of stars. 20 floors up, the world looked peaceful, almost magical. It was impossible to imagine that in a few minutes this same view would become the setting for something so terrible. "You've been so distant lately," Terry said, accepting the champagne flute he offered her. "I was starting to worry that you were pulling away from me." If only she knew how far he'd already pulled away. If only she understood that the man pouring her champagne was no longer the husband who had once promised to protect her from all harm. "I know I've been preoccupied with work," Danny said, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "But I wanted tonight to be special, to remind us both of what we have together." Terry moved closer to him, her familiar scent of vanilla and jasmine filling his senses. For a moment, the old Danny surfaced, the man who had fallen in love with this woman's laugh, who had spent hours just watching her sleep, who had believed their love could conquer anything. "I love you so much, Danny Reyes," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "Whatever's been bothering you, whatever stress you're carrying, we'll get through it together. We always do." The words hit him like physical blows. How could she speak of love and togetherness when she'd been betraying him for weeks? How could she touch him so tenderly when those same hands had been touching Miguel in their bed? "Do you remember our first date?" Danny asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "When I brought you up here and you were so afraid of heights you wouldn't go near the railing?" Terry laughed, the memory clearly precious to her. "I thought you were crazy, wanting to have dinner on a terrace 20 floors up, but you held my hand and promised you wouldn't let me fall." "And I meant it," Danny said, his heart breaking with the irony. "I meant every word." They stood together in comfortable silence, sipping champagne and looking out over the city that had been the backdrop to their entire relationship. Danny found himself cataloguing every detail, the way the wind played with Terry's hair, the soft glow of candlelight on her skin, the trust in her eyes as she stood so close to the edge. "You know what I love most about this view," Terry said, moving toward the railing. "It makes everything else seem so small and manageable. All our problems, all our worries, they just disappear when we're up here together." She was standing exactly where he needed her to be, her back to him, completely vulnerable and trusting. All he had to do was take 3 steps forward and push. One moment of action, and all his problems would disappear just like she'd said. But Danny found himself frozen, his body refusing to obey the commands his mind was giving. This was Terry, the woman who had never missed one of his birthday parties, who had held him when his father died, who had spent 3 years hoping and praying for the children they couldn't seem to conceive. "Danny?" She turned around, concern creeping into her voice. "You look pale. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine," he lied, his hands shaking as he set down his champagne glass. "Just thinking about how lucky I am to have you." "We're lucky to have each other," she corrected, moving back toward him with that graceful walk that had first caught his attention 5 years ago. Danny's phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Time to go. Stick to the plan." The reminder hit him like a bucket of cold water, washing away the momentary softness and replacing it with the cold determination that had brought him this far. He thought about the videos again, about Miguel's hands on his wife's body, about the lies and deception that had poisoned everything he'd believed in. "Actually," he said, his voice hardening, "there is something I wanted to show you." "What is it?" Danny walked to the edge of the terrace, motioning for her to join him. "Come here. You have to see this view from the corner. It's incredible." Terry hesitated for a moment, her old fear of heights making her cautious, but trust won out, as it always did with her. She moved to where he was standing, her shoulder brushing against his arm. "What am I looking for?" she asked, leaning slightly over the railing to get a better view. This was it. This was the moment Kim had planned so carefully, the opportunity he'd been waiting for. All he had to do was push, and it would all be over. The betrayal, the financial ruin, the crushing weight of loving someone who had systematically destroyed his life. "Close your eyes," Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why?" "Trust me. Just close your eyes and I'll show you something beautiful." Terry smiled and obediently closed her eyes, her face serene and peaceful in the candlelight. She trusted him completely, absolutely, without reservation. Even after everything she'd done to him, she still believed he would never hurt her. Danny raised his hands, placing them gently on her shoulders. She was so small, so fragile. It would take almost no effort at all to send her over the edge. One push, and she'd fall 20 floors to the concrete below. One push, and he'd be free. "I love you," he whispered, the words feeling like a prayer and a condemnation at the same time. "I love you too," she replied, her eyes still closed, still trusting. Danny's hands tightened on her shoulders. He thought about the insurance money, about starting over somewhere new, about finding someone who wouldn't lie to him and betray him and make a mockery of everything he held sacred. He thought about justice. He thought about survival. He thought about the man he used to be and the monster he was about to become. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and then he pushed. Terry's eyes flew open in shock and terror as she felt herself falling forward. Her scream pierced the night air like a knife, a sound of betrayal and disbelief that would haunt Danny for the rest of his life. She grabbed desperately for the railing, for anything that might save her, but gravity and momentum were stronger than her will to live. Her beautiful blue dress billowed around her like wings as she fell, and for a moment she looked almost like an angel against the city lights. Then she was gone. Danny stood at the railing, his hands still tingling from the contact with her shoulders, staring down into the darkness where his wife had disappeared. The scream echoed in his ears, but the city below was silent and still. He'd done it. After days of planning and agonizing, he'd actually done it. Terry was dead, and he was free. So why did he feel like his own life had just ended? Following his mother's instructions, Danny quickly gathered the champagne glasses and candles, erasing any evidence of their romantic evening. He couldn't look over the edge again, couldn't confirm what he already knew was true. Instead, he focused on the plan. Get to the airport, catch the flight to Chicago, establish his alibi. As he walked through their house for what he believed would be the last time, Danny tried to feel the relief and freedom Kim had promised would come. Instead, all he felt was a hollow emptiness where his heart used to be. The next morning, Danny would fly to Chicago as planned, establishing his alibi before returning to discover the tragic accident. But that night, driving away from the scene of his crime, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd destroyed far more than just his unfaithful wife. He'd destroyed himself. Unknown to Danny, 20 floors below in the darkness behind their building, a safety net stretched between two maintenance scaffolds caught a falling woman with brutal efficiency. The impact knocked her unconscious and broke 2 ribs, but Terry Reyes was very much alive. Miguel Santos, the plumber who had been blackmailed into helping stage the fake affair videos, had spent the last week consumed with guilt over his role in Kim Creech's elaborate deception. When he'd overheard Kim finalizing the murder plan, he'd realized that their scheme had grown far beyond simple blackmail. Unable to live with himself if he let an innocent woman die, Miguel had spent the day installing the safety equipment that would save Terry's life. As sirens wailed in the distance and emergency responders rushed to the scene, Miguel made the hardest decision of his life. He would tell Terry the truth about everything, the fake videos, the manipulation, the mother-in-law who had orchestrated it all, and together they would make sure that justice was served. But first, he had to help her survive the night and recover from injuries that could have been fatal. As he cradled Terry's unconscious form, Miguel whispered a prayer of gratitude that he'd found the courage to do the right thing. The game Kim Creech thought she'd won was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Chapter 7. 2 Years Lost. Sometimes the greatest punishment isn't death. It's waking up to discover that everything you thought you'd won was built on lies. The steady beep of machines and the sharp smell of antiseptic slowly penetrated Danny's consciousness like sunlight breaking through fog. His eyes opened to unfamiliar surroundings. White walls, medical equipment, and the concerned face of a woman he'd hoped never to see again. "Thank God," Kim whispered, reaching for his hand. "The doctors weren't sure you'd ever wake up." Danny tried to speak, but his throat felt like sandpaper. How long had he been unconscious? The last thing he remembered was boarding a plane to Chicago, his hands still trembling from what he'd done to Terry. Everything after that was a black void. "Water," he managed to croak. Kim helped him sip from a plastic cup, her movements careful and practiced. She looked older somehow, more fragile than he remembered. Grey streaks had appeared in her perfectly styled hair, and new lines creased her face. "How long?" Danny asked when he could finally speak. 2 years, Kim said softly. "You've been in a coma for 2 years, Daniel. The accident happened the day after you got to Chicago. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit your rental car head-on. 2 years. The number hit Danny like a physical blow. 2 years of his life, gone in an instant. 2 years during which the world had continued spinning while he lay trapped in darkness. "The business?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Kim's expression confirmed his fears. "Gone. Everything's gone, Daniel. The company collapsed within 6 months of your accident. Without you there to fight the creditors and manage the crisis, it all fell apart." Danny closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of his losses. Not just his business, but years of his life, relationships, everything he'd worked to build. The house? Foreclosed 18 months ago. I managed to save some of your personal belongings, but most of it's gone too. The irony was suffocating. He'd murdered his wife to save his financial empire, and now that empire had crumbled anyway. All that planning, all that pain, all that destruction, for nothing. "Where are we living now?" Danny asked, dreading the answer. "A small apartment downtown," Kim said. "Nothing like what you're used to, but it's clean and safe. The insurance money from—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "From the tragedy helped us get by during the worst of it. The insurance money." Danny felt a chill run down his spine as the memories came flooding back. Terry's scream, the fall, the plan that was supposed to solve all their problems. In his 2-year absence, had they actually collected on Terry's death? "Tell me about the investigation," he said carefully. Kim glanced around the hospital room nervously before leaning closer. "There wasn't much to investigate. Poor Terry had an accident while you were out of town on business. She fell from the terrace during what appeared to be a romantic evening gone wrong. The police found the champagne, the candles. It looked like she'd been preparing a surprise for your return. The story was different from what they'd planned, but it served the same purpose. Danny was supposed to have discovered the body when he returned from his business trip, not learned about it while lying unconscious in a Chicago hospital. Did anyone suspect anything?" "Why would they?" Kim asked with practiced innocence. "You were 3 states away when it happened. You had credit card receipts, hotel records, witnesses who saw you at restaurants and shops. The investigation was perfunctory. Tragic accident. Case closed." Danny felt a mixture of relief and revulsion. Their plan had worked, even better than they'd hoped. Terry was dead. He had an unshakable alibi, and they'd collected the insurance money. So why did victory taste like ashes in his mouth? "I want to see where she's buried," he said suddenly. Kim's hand tightened on his. "Daniel, I don't think that's wise. You need to focus on recovery, on rebuilding your life. Looking backward will only cause more pain." "I need to see her grave," Danny insisted, his voice stronger now. "I need to say goodbye properly." Kim was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with the calculating expression he remembered from their planning sessions. "If that's what you need for closure, then of course, but not today. Today, you need to focus on getting your strength back." Over the next few days, as Danny slowly regained his physical capabilities, Kim filled him in on everything he'd missed. The business partners who'd abandoned him, the employees who'd found new jobs, the friends who'd gradually stopped calling when it became clear he might never wake up. "It's better this way," Kim said during one of their conversations. "You can start completely fresh, without all the baggage of your old life weighing you down." But Danny didn't feel free. He felt hollow, like a man walking through the ruins of everything he'd once cared about. The money from Terry's insurance policy, $2 million that had seemed like salvation 2 years ago, now felt like blood money burning a hole in his conscience. "What have you been doing for 2 years?" Danny asked one afternoon as Kim helped him with his physical therapy exercises. "Taking care of you," she replied simply. "Making sure you got the best medical care, handling your affairs, keeping your memory alive for when you woke up." "What about Australia? I thought you were going to visit Aunt Margaret." Kim's expression flickered almost imperceptibly before returning to its practiced calm. "I did go, Daniel. I was there for 6 months before your accident. When I heard what happened, I came straight back. You're my son. Where else would I be?" Something in her tone made Danny suspicious, but he was too exhausted to pursue it. The process of rebuilding his body and mind from 2 years of unconsciousness was consuming all his energy. A week later, Danny was finally discharged from the hospital. Kim drove him to their new apartment, a modest two-bedroom place that felt like a prison cell after the luxury they'd once enjoyed. Everything was smaller, cheaper, a constant reminder of how far they'd fallen. "It's temporary," Kim assured him as they climbed the stairs to the third floor. "Once you're fully recovered, we can start making plans for the future." "What future?" Danny asked bitterly. "I'm 37 years old with no business, no assets, and a 2-year gap in my resume. What kind of future am I supposed to build from this?" "You have the insurance money," Kim reminded him. "That's more than most people get to start over with." The insurance money. Every time she mentioned it, Danny felt sick. $2 million that he'd bought with his wife's life, with his own soul. Money that was supposed to represent freedom, but felt more like a chain around his neck. "I want to visit her grave tomorrow," Danny said, settling onto the worn couch that was a far cry from the Italian leather furniture in their old house. "Daniel." "Tomorrow, Mom. I'm not asking." Kim sighed but nodded. "If that's what you need." That night, Danny lay in his narrow bed staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together the fragments of his shattered life. In 2 years, everything had changed. His business was gone, his home was gone, his health was compromised, and his wife was dead by his own hand. The plan that was supposed to save him had destroyed him more completely than bankruptcy ever could have. But tomorrow, he would finally face what he'd done. He would stand at Terry's grave and confront the reality that he'd murdered an innocent woman for money that hadn't even saved him in the end. As sleep finally claimed him, Danny's dreams were haunted by the sound of Terry's scream echoing through the darkness, a reminder that some sins follow you no matter how far you run or how long you sleep. The next morning, Kim drove him to Riverside Cemetery in stony silence. She'd tried one last time over breakfast to dissuade him from this pilgrimage, but Danny's determination was absolute. He needed to see where they'd buried the woman he'd loved and destroyed. "It's over there," Kim said, pointing toward a section of newer headstones as they walked through the manicured grounds. "Row 12, plot 37. Danny's legs felt unsteady as they approached the gravesite. 2 years of physical therapy couldn't prepare him for the emotional impact of seeing his wife's name carved in granite. Teresa Marie Gizi Reyes, beloved wife, taken too soon. "They used her maiden name too," Kim noted clinically. "I thought that was a nice touch." Danny knelt beside the headstone, his fingers tracing the engraved letters. The dates told the story of a life cut short. Born 32 years ago, died the night he'd pushed her from their terrace. The math was simple and devastating. "I used to bring flowers," Kim said, standing behind him, "in the beginning when people were watching, but it's been months since anyone came by to pay their respects." "Her family?" "They blame you," Kim said bluntly. "They think the stress of your failing business drove her to suicide. Her sister hasn't spoken to us since the funeral." Another relationship destroyed, another bridge burned by the choices he'd made. Danny wondered if Terry's family would feel differently if they knew the truth, that their daughter hadn't killed herself, that she'd been murdered by the man who'd promised to love and protect her. "I need some time alone," Danny said. Kim hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with leaving him there. "Don't do anything foolish, Daniel. You've already lost enough." After she walked away, Danny finally allowed himself to grieve properly. For 2 years, while his body lay unconscious, his guilt had been suspended in time. Now it crashed over him like a tsunami, threatening to drown him in the magnitude of what he'd done. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the headstone. "God, Terry, I'm so sorry." But apologies felt meaningless in the face of murder. What could he possibly say to make amends for taking her life? What words could bridge the gap between the man who had loved her and the monster who had killed her? As Danny knelt in the cemetery, he made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He couldn't bring Terry back, couldn't undo the terrible thing he'd done, but he could make sure that her death hadn't been completely meaningless. He would find a way to honor her memory, to use the blood money from her insurance policy to do something good in the world. It wouldn't absolve him, wouldn't earn him forgiveness, but it might give some meaning to the nightmare his life had become. "I'll make it right somehow," he promised the grave. "I don't know how, but I'll find a way to make this right." When Kim returned to pick him up an hour later, she found Danny standing beside the car, his face set with new determination. "Ready to go?" she asked. "Yes," Danny said. "I think I'm finally ready to start living again." But as they drove away from the cemetery, Danny didn't notice the figure watching from behind a distant oak tree. Someone who had been visiting this grave regularly for 2 years, someone who had never believed the official story about Terry's death, someone who had been waiting patiently for Danny Reyes to wake up so that justice could finally be served. Miguel Santos stepped out from behind the tree and pulled out his cell phone, dialing a number he'd memorized long ago. "He's awake," Miguel said when the call connected. "Danny's awake, and he just visited the grave. It's time." On the other end of the line, a woman's voice, a voice that was supposed to be silenced forever, responded with quiet determination. "Good. Let's finish this." The game Kim Creech thought she'd won 2 years ago was about to enter its final phase, and this time the real victim would have her turn to play. Chapter 8. The Impossible Truth. The dead don't stay buried when they've been murdered for lies. Sometimes they return to collect what's owed. Danny's hands shook as he filled out the insurance claim paperwork, each signature feeling like another nail in his own coffin. The Mutual Life Insurance office was sterile and corporate, designed to process death efficiently and without sentiment. After 2 years of medical bills and legal complications, this was supposed to be the final step in claiming Terry's life insurance benefit. "Just a few more signatures, Mr. Reyes," the claims adjuster said with practiced sympathy. "I know this must be difficult, but we're almost finished." Kim sat beside him, her presence both supportive and suffocating. She'd insisted on coming along, claiming she wanted to help him through the emotional difficulty of the process. But Danny suspected she just wanted to make sure he didn't say anything that might jeopardize their carefully constructed lie. "The death certificate is in order," the adjuster continued, "and your alibi during the time of the accident has been thoroughly verified. Everything appears to be straightforward." Straightforward. If only she knew how much planning and manipulation had gone into making this moment seem straightforward. If only she knew that the grieving husband sitting across from her desk was actually the man who'd pushed his wife off a 20-story building. "How long before the funds are disbursed?" Kim asked, her voice carefully modulated to sound concerned rather than eager. "Given the amount involved and the fact that you were incapacitated for 2 years, we had to wait for your recovery before final processing," the adjuster replied. $2 million requires the beneficiary's personal signature. Power of attorney wasn't sufficient for a claim this large. But now that you're here, I don't anticipate any problems. $2 million. The number should have felt like salvation, like the solution to all his problems. Instead, it felt like the price tag on his soul. "Mr. Reyes?" The adjuster was looking at him with concern. "Are you feeling all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," Danny managed. "Just tired. The recovery from my accident has been challenging." "Of course. I can't imagine what you've been through, losing your wife in such a tragic way, then suffering your own life-threatening accident just days later. You're remarkably strong to have survived all of that." Strong. Danny almost laughed at the irony. He wasn't strong. He was a coward who had let his mother manipulate him into murdering an innocent woman. Whatever strength he'd once possessed had died the night he pushed Terry off that terrace. "There's just one final signature needed," the adjuster said, sliding a document across the desk. "This acknowledges receipt of the death benefit and closes the claim permanently." Danny picked up the pen, his hand trembling as he prepared to sign away the last vestige of his conscience. Once he signed this paper, there would be no going back, no way to undo what they'd done. The insurance money would make their crime profitable, cementing his transformation from husband to murderer. "Danny!" The voice came from behind him, soft and familiar, and absolutely impossible. Danny's pen froze halfway to the paper as every nerve in his body went into shock. "Hello, baby." Danny turned around slowly, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were telling him. Standing in the doorway of the insurance office, holding a beautiful 2-year-old child with dark curls and his own green eyes, was his wife, Terry, alive, healthy, real. The pen fell from his nerveless fingers as Danny's world exploded into fragments. This couldn't be happening. This was impossible. Terry was dead. He'd killed her himself, watched her fall, heard her scream as she plummeted 20 floors to the concrete below. "Surprised to see me?" Terry asked, her voice carrying a cold edge he'd never heard before. She looked older, harder, like someone who had seen too much darkness and survived it. But she was unmistakably, impossibly alive. Kim made a strangled sound behind him, her face going white as paper. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "You're dead. You're supposed to be dead." "Sorry to disappoint you," Terry said, her eyes burning with righteous fury, "but it takes more than a push off a building to kill me, especially when someone's kind enough to install a safety net." The child in her arms, their child, Danny realized with stunning clarity, looked at him with curious eyes that were identical to his own. A son or daughter he'd never known existed, born from the woman he'd tried to murder. "Terry," Danny gasped, his voice barely audible. How is this possible? You want to know how I survived?" Terry stepped closer, her presence filling the small office like an avenging angel. "Miguel Santos, the man your mother paid to stage those fake affair videos, couldn't live with himself when he learned you were planning to kill me. He installed safety equipment below our terrace and saved my life." Fake videos. The words hit Danny like physical blows, each revelation destroying another piece of the reality he'd built around his terrible decision. "The affair was fake," he whispered. "Every single second of it," Terry confirmed, her voice sharp as a blade. "Your mother hired Miguel to seduce me, but when I rejected his advances, she had him create fake videos using actors and clever editing. Everything you saw, everything you believed, all lies designed to turn you against me." Danny felt like he was drowning in quicksand, each breath becoming more difficult as the magnitude of his mother's deception crashed over him. He'd murdered his wife, tried to murder his wife, based on fabricated evidence. He'd destroyed everything he'd ever loved because of lies. "The baby," he said, staring at the child who shared his features. "Is it your son?" Terry confirmed. "Conceived the week before you tried to kill me. I was going to surprise you with the news that night, but you never gave me the chance." Danny's legs gave out, and he collapsed into his chair as the full horror of what he'd done washed over him. Not only had he tried to murder an innocent woman, but he'd tried to murder his pregnant wife. He'd nearly killed his own child, the child they'd been trying to have for 3 years. 2 years, Terry continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. 2 years I've been building a case against you and your mother. 2 years of gathering evidence, documenting the insurance fraud, preparing for this moment. "Terry, please," Danny gasped, tears streaming down his face. I believed. God, what have I done?" "You tried to murder me for money," she said simply. "You pushed your pregnant wife off a building because your mother convinced you I was cheating. That's what you've done, Danny." Kim suddenly lunged forward, her composure finally cracking completely. "You little bitch!" she screamed. "You've ruined everything! He was supposed to be free of you!" Before Kim could reach Terry, the office door opened and 3 police officers entered, moving with practiced efficiency. "Kim Creech and Daniel Reyes," the lead officer announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud." The handcuffs felt cold against Danny's wrists, but not as cold as the look in Terry's eyes as she watched him being taken into custody. 2 years of planning had led to this moment, his wife's perfect revenge. "How long have you been planning this?" Danny asked as the officers prepared to lead him away. "Since the night you pushed me off that terrace," Terry replied. "Since the moment I realized that the man I loved more than life itself had tried to kill me based on lies." "I loved you," Danny said desperately. "I still love you. Everything I did, I thought I was protecting myself from what? From a faithful wife who was carrying your child? From a woman who never betrayed you in any way?" Terry's voice cracked slightly, showing the pain beneath her anger. "You didn't protect yourself, Danny. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose to believe her lies over my love." As the police led him toward the door, Danny caught sight of Miguel standing in the hallway. The young man looked older too, marked by the weight of what he'd been forced to participate in. "I'm sorry," Miguel said quietly as Danny passed. "I'm sorry I ever let her drag me into this, but I couldn't let an innocent woman die." "Thank you," Danny whispered. "Thank you for saving her." Kim was ranting and struggling against her handcuffs, her carefully maintained facade completely shattered. "This isn't over," she screamed at Terry. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." "Yes, it is," Terry said with quiet finality. "It's over, Kim. You lost the moment you decided that love was less important than money." As Danny was loaded into the police car, he caught one last glimpse of his wife holding their son, the family he'd destroyed through his own stupidity and weakness. Terry wasn't looking at him anymore. She was focused on their child, probably explaining in age-appropriate terms why Daddy was being taken away by police officers. The child would grow up knowing that his father had tried to kill his mother. That knowledge would shape his entire life, just as Danny's choices had shaped everything that came after that terrible night on the terrace. As the police car pulled away from the insurance office, Danny finally understood the true cost of his mother's manipulation. He hadn't just lost his business, his money, or his freedom. He'd lost his family, his identity, and any chance of redemption. The man who had once promised to love and protect Terry until death do them part had instead tried to part them with death itself. And now, as he faced the consequences of that choice, Danny realized that some sins are too profound for forgiveness, too deep for healing. Behind them, Kim's voice could still be heard screaming threats and denials, her own reckoning just beginning. But Danny was beyond caring about his mother's fate. All he could think about was the child in Terry's arms, his son, who would never know the love of the father who had tried to kill him before he was even born. The game was over. Justice had won, and Danny Reyes would spend the rest of his life paying for the moment he chose his mother's lies over his wife's love. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Prison walls don't just contain bodies, they force men to confront the monsters they've become in the echo of their own footsteps. Danny's cell was exactly 8 feet by 10 feet, a concrete box that had become the entire universe for a man who once commanded boardrooms and penthouses. The metal bunk, stainless steel toilet, and single-barred window represented the sum total of his possessions now, a stark contrast to the luxury he'd taken for granted just 3 years ago. 3 years. That's how long it had been since his arrest at the insurance office, since the moment his wife had returned from the dead to destroy the carefully constructed lie his life had become. The trial had been a media sensation. Millionaire attempts to murder pregnant wife for insurance money, with every sordid detail splashed across newspapers and television screens. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud. The judge had sentenced him to 20 years, noting that the premeditated nature of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim, a pregnant woman, warranted severe punishment, though the attempt rather than completed murder allowed for some possibility of rehabilitation. Kim had died of a massive heart attack 2 weeks into her own trial, her body unable to handle the stress of her perfect plan unraveling so completely. The coroner said it was natural causes, but Danny knew better. His mother had died of shame, of rage, of the crushing realization that her manipulation had destroyed both their lives for nothing. He hadn't been allowed to attend her funeral. "Reyes, visitor!" The guard's voice echoed through the cell block, cutting through Danny's meditation on the past. It was unusual. He rarely received visitors. Most of his former friends and business associates had abandoned him when the true nature of his crimes became public knowledge. As he walked through the prison corridors in shackles, Danny wondered who could possibly want to see him. His lawyer had stopped returning calls after the appeals process had been exhausted. The few family members who hadn't completely disowned him lived too far away to make the trip regularly. The visiting room was divided by thick plexiglass, communication possible only through scratchy phones. Danny settled into the plastic chair and picked up the handset, looking across at his visitor with shock and confusion. Miguel Santos sat on the other side of the glass, older and wearier than Danny remembered, but unmistakably the man who had saved Terry's life and helped orchestrate Danny's downfall. "Why are you here?" Danny asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone in prison, preferring the solitude that came with being a child killer, or close enough to one that it made no difference to his fellow inmates. "Because someone needs to know what really happened," Miguel replied, his accent thicker than Danny remembered. "Someone needs to understand how we all became pawns in her game." "Played? You helped destroy my life." Miguel's expression hardened. "Your mother destroyed your life, Danny. She destroyed all our lives. I was just trying to survive." Over the next hour, Miguel told Danny the complete story, details that hadn't come out during the trial, revelations that painted an even darker picture of Kim Creech's manipulation. "She didn't just pay me to seduce your wife," Miguel explained. "She threatened my family, my kids, Danny. She knew where they went to school, where my ex-wife worked. She made it clear that if I didn't cooperate, something bad might happen to them." Danny felt sick. Even from prison, learning new depths of his mother's evil felt like fresh wounds being carved into his soul. "The videos were so sophisticated," Miguel continued. "She hired professional actors, used computer editing that made it look completely real. I helped set up the cameras, but I never imagined she was planning actual murder." "When did you realize what she intended?" "A week before it happened. I overheard her on the phone talking about insurance policies and perfect alibis. That's when I knew you were going to try to kill Terry." Miguel's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "I had 48 hours to figure out how to save her life without getting my own family killed. Installing that safety net was the only thing I could think of." "Why didn't you go to the police?" "With what proof? Your mother was careful. Everything was verbal, nothing in writing. It would have been my word against hers, and she had money and connections. Who was going to believe a plumber over a rich lady?" Danny stared at Miguel through the plexiglass, seeing not the homewrecker he'd imagined for so long, but another victim of Kim Creech's elaborate manipulation. They'd all been pieces on her chessboard. Danny, Terry, Miguel, even the actors who'd unknowingly participated in creating fake evidence. "Terry knows about your family being threatened?" Danny asked. "She knows everything. It's why she didn't press charges against me. She understands that I was trapped, just like you were." "I wasn't trapped," Danny said bitterly. "I made a choice. A horrible, unforgivable choice." "You made a choice based on lies," Miguel corrected. "Your mother was a master manipulator. She knew exactly which buttons to push, exactly how to make murder seem like the only rational option." They sat in silence for several minutes, two men whose lives had been forever altered by Kim Creech's toxic ambition. "How is she?" Danny finally asked. "How is Terry?" Miguel smiled for the first time since the conversation began. "She's strong. Stronger than any of us gave her credit for. She's raised your son practically single-handed, built a new life for herself." "My son." The words felt foreign in Danny's mouth. "What's his name?" "Patrick. Patrick Daniel Santos Reyes." Danny's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Santos? She gave him my last name too," Miguel explained. "I helped save his life, helped raise him the first 2 years while you were in your coma. She says I earned the right to be called his family." The generosity of it took Danny's breath away. Even after everything she'd suffered, Terry had found room in her heart to honor the man who'd rescued her. It was exactly the kind of grace he'd fallen in love with, exactly the kind of person he'd tried to murder. "She wants to see you," Miguel said suddenly. "What?" "Terry, she wants to visit you. She's been thinking about it for months, but she needed to be sure she could handle it emotionally." Danny's heart hammered against his ribs. "Why would she want to see me?" "I tried to kill her. I tried to kill our son." "Because she needs closure," Miguel replied. "Because part of her still loves the man you used to be, before your mother poisoned your mind. And because Patrick is getting old enough to ask questions about his father." The thought of his son, now 3 years old, asking about Daddy, made Danny's chest tighten with pain. What could Terry possibly tell him? How do you explain to a child that his father is in prison for trying to murder his mother? "I don't deserve her forgiveness," Danny said. "Maybe not," Miguel agreed, "but she deserves the chance to give it, if she chooses to. That's her decision to make, not yours." As visiting time ended and Miguel prepared to leave, he delivered one final message that hit Danny like a physical blow. "She loved you completely," Miguel said. "Even after you pushed her off that terrace, even after she knew what you'd tried to do, part of her still loved you. That's what makes this whole thing so tragic. You destroyed something real and beautiful because you believed lies about something that never existed." After Miguel left, Danny was escorted back to his cell in a daze. He lay on his narrow bunk staring at the ceiling, processing everything he'd learned. His mother hadn't just manipulated him into attempted murder. She'd threatened innocent children, corrupted multiple lives, and orchestrated a web of deception so complex that its tentacles were still being discovered years later. But the most devastating revelation wasn't about Kim's evil. It was about Terry's love. Even now, even after everything he'd done, she was considering visiting him. The woman he'd tried to murder was willing to offer him something he'd never dared hope for, the possibility of redemption. That night, for the first time since his arrest, Danny allowed himself to cry. Not from self-pity, but from grief for the man he'd been before his mother's poison had corrupted his heart. That man had been worthy of Terry's love. That man would have seen through the lies and chosen trust over suspicion. That man was dead, killed on the same night he'd tried to kill his wife. But maybe, just maybe, something new could be born from the ashes of that destruction. Something that might eventually be worthy of the forgiveness Terry was considering offering. Danny closed his eyes and whispered a prayer to a God he wasn't sure was still listening. "Please let me find a way to earn the love I threw away. Let me become the man she deserves, even if it's 20 years too late." Outside his cell window, the stars shone down on a world that had moved on without him. A world where his son was learning to ride a bicycle and ask questions about the father he'd never known. Danny had 17 more years to figure out how to answer those questions, 17 more years to become someone worthy of the second chance he might, incredibly, impossibly, be offered. The reckoning had come and gone. Now, the real work of redemption could begin. Chapter 10. Justice and Redemption. Some stories end with revenge, others with forgiveness. But the rarest ones end with love strong enough to survive the worst betrayal imaginable. The prison gate clanged shut behind Danny for the last time, the sound of freedom both terrifying and surreal after 10 years of concrete walls and razor wire. 10 years, half his sentence, thanks to good behavior and the prison education programs he'd embraced with desperate determination. At 47, Danny Reyes was a different man than the one who'd entered Millfield Correctional Facility. Grey streaked his temples, lines mapped the geography of his regret across his face, and his hands bore calluses from a decade spent in the prison workshop, crafting furniture for families he'd never meet. More importantly, his heart had been rebuilt from the ground up. "Daniel?" The voice was softer than he remembered, but unmistakably hers. Danny turned to see Terry standing beside a modest sedan, her beauty undiminished by the years that had passed. She wore a simple blue dress, not unlike the one she'd been wearing the night he'd pushed her from their terrace, and her smile was cautious but genuine. Beside her stood a boy who could only be Patrick, 13 years old now, with Danny's green eyes and Terry's determined chin. He was tall for his age, with the lean build of someone who'd inherited his father's height and his mother's grace. "Hello, Terry," Danny said, his voice catching on her name. They'd exchanged letters for the past 7 years, visits every few months that had slowly rebuilt some fragile bridge between them. But seeing her in the context of his freedom felt different, weighted with possibility and terror in equal measure. "Dad?" Patrick stepped forward, his voice cracking slightly with adolescence and uncertainty. Danny's knees nearly buckled. It was the first time his son had ever called him that, the first time he'd heard the word from lips that shared his DNA and his stubborn jawline. "Hello, son," Danny managed, fighting back tears that had been building for a decade. They embraced awkwardly, a father and son meeting as strangers, connected by blood and separated by circumstances too complex for easy explanation. Patrick was solid and real in his arms, proof that some miracles survive even the worst betrayals. "Are you ready?" Terry asked gently. Danny nodded, climbing into the passenger seat of her car. The simple act of sitting in a vehicle not bound for court or medical appointments felt surreal. For 10 years his world had been contained within walls. Now it stretched out endlessly in all directions. "Where are we going?" he asked as Terry pulled away from the prison. "Home," she said simply. "Your home. Our home. If you want it to be." Danny stared at her in amazement. During their visits and letters, they'd discussed his release, his need for housing and employment, his desire to be part of Patrick's life. But he'd never dared hope for this. For the possibility of redemption so complete, it included rebuilding the family he'd tried to destroy. "Terry, I don't understand. After everything I did—" "You did a terrible thing," she interrupted, her voice steady but kind. "You tried to kill me and our son because you believed lies about who I was. That's not something I've forgotten or minimized." Patrick shifted uncomfortably in the back seat. He knew the broad strokes of the story, that his father had been manipulated into doing something awful, that prison had been about learning to be better. But the specifics were still too heavy for a 13-year-old to carry. "So why?" Danny asked. Terry was quiet for several miles, navigating through the suburban streets that led to their new neighborhood. Finally, she pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house with a small garden and a basketball hoop mounted above the garage. "Because I learned something important during the 10 years you've been gone," she said, turning off the engine. I learned that love isn't just about the good times. Real love, the kind that lasts, is about choosing to forgive the unforgivable when someone proves they've truly changed. They sat in the car as she continued. Patrick, listening with the intense focus of a teenager, trying to understand the adult world. The man who pushed me off that terrace was sick, Danny, poisoned by grief and manipulation and desperation. But the man who wrote me letters every week for 7 years, who earned his GED and then a bachelor's degree from prison, who started a support group for inmates dealing with family violence, that man is someone I can love again. Danny felt tears streaming down his face. How can you be sure? How can you trust that I won't hurt you again? Because you've spent 10 years proving it, Terry replied. Not with words, but with actions. With the way you've taken responsibility for what you did without making excuses. With the way you've changed yourself from the inside out. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. Do you know what this is? Danny shook his head. Letters from other inmates whose lives you've touched. Testimony from the prison staff about the man you became. Documentation of every course you took, every program you completed, every life you helped save through your counseling work. She handed him the folder, and Danny saw that it was organized with the same meticulous care Terry had always brought to everything important. I've been documenting your transformation for years, she continued. Not because I was planning to use it for anything, but because I needed to convince myself that the change was real. That the man I was starting to love again wasn't just an illusion created by distance and time. And what did you conclude? Terry smiled, the expression lighting up her face in a way that took Danny back to their earliest days together. I concluded that people can change if they want it badly enough. And you, Danny Reyes, wanted it more than anyone I've ever known. Patrick cleared his throat from the back seat. Does this mean we're going to be a real family now? It was the question that cut to the heart of everything. The hope that had sustained Danny through his darkest prison nights, the dream that had seemed too impossible to voice. If your father wants that, Terry said, looking directly into Danny's eyes. If he's ready to do the work of rebuilding trust and proving every day that he deserves a second chance. I want it more than anything, Danny said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I need you to understand. I know I don't deserve this. I know that what I did was unforgivable. Maybe it was unforgivable 10 years ago, Terry replied. But forgiveness isn't about what someone deserves. It's about what the person doing the forgiving needs for their own healing. And I need to believe that love is stronger than hate, that redemption is possible even for the worst sins. They went inside together, and Danny marveled at the home Terry had created. It was modest but warm, filled with photographs that chronicled Patrick's childhood, birthdays, school events, Little League games. All the moments Danny had missed, all the memories he'd forfeited through his terrible choices. I kept this for you, Terry said, leading him to a small room that had been set up as an office. On the desk was a framed photograph from their wedding day, and beside it, a letter in his own handwriting. Danny picked up the letter and recognized it immediately, the first one he'd written to her from prison, the one where he'd taken full responsibility for his actions and begged not for forgiveness, but for the chance to somehow make amends. You kept it all these years? I kept it to remind myself of the moment you started becoming someone I could trust again, Terry said. The moment you stopped making excuses and started making changes. That evening, they sat together on the front porch as Patrick practiced basketball shots in the driveway. The normalcy of it was overwhelming. The simple pleasure of being a family, of watching their son grow into the man he was becoming. What happens now? Danny asked. Now we take it one day at a time, Terry replied. You'll find work. Miguel's construction company is thriving, and he's offered you a position. We'll attend counseling together, work through all the things that still need healing, and we'll learn how to be married again properly this time. Married again? Terry laughed, pulling out a small velvet box. I never divorced you, Danny. Legally, we're still husband and wife, but I thought you might want to renew our vows, make new promises based on who we are now, instead of who we were then. Danny opened the box to find a simple gold band. Nothing like the expensive ring he'd originally given her, but somehow more meaningful for its simplicity. Will you marry me again, Danny Reyes? She asked, her eyes shining with tears and hope. Will you promise to love and protect me for real this time, knowing what that actually means? Yes, Danny said, slipping the ring onto his finger. For the rest of my life, yes. As the sun set over their modest suburban home, Danny Reyes understood that he'd been given something rarer than wealth or success or even justice. He'd been given grace, the unmerited gift of love from the woman he'd wronged beyond measure. It would take years more to fully rebuild what he'd destroyed. There would be difficult conversations, moments of doubt, old wounds that needed tending. But for the first time in over a decade, Danny believed in the possibility of happiness. Not the shallow happiness he'd once sought through money and status, but the deep joy that comes from being truly known and loved despite your worst failures. He was home, he was forgiven, and somehow impossibly, he was loved. The boy in the driveway made another shot, and Danny cheered for his son, their son, as Terry's hand found his in the gathering darkness. Some stories end with revenge, others end with justice. The best ones end with love that's strong enough to resurrect the dead.